Thank you for tuning in to another talk about factors supporting good health and spiritual well-being. Before we start, let us ask the Master Creator and Sustainer to help us understand His creation. Dear Lord, as we once again contemplate the wonders of your creation, we cry out with the Psalms, "For you, O Lord, have made me glad by your deeds. I sing for joy at the works of your hands. How great are your works, O Lord! How deep are your thoughts! Impress on our minds and help us understand the breath of life and the value of being a living soul. Amen. Last time we discussed water and the importance not to become dehydrated. And the talk before that, we discussed the sun and the importance of sunbathing. Allow me to fill you in quickly on some fresh data from the COVID-19 research. This world map is dated 22nd March 2020 and shows a striking Northern Hemisphere bias plotting COVID-19 deaths by latitude and overlaying that with population, the red line. The Northern Hemisphere was experiencing winter and the latitudes above 20 degrees were severely affected by the outbreak. In contrast, case fatality rates in the lower latitudes and in the southern hemisphere have been relatively low, probably due to those areas enjoying summer and sun exposure. Medical studies by vitamin D researchers have, over the past 10 years, shown an ever clearer picture of how vitamin D and seasonal outbreak of viral infected diseases take place. They've also conclusively proved that raising your vitamin D levels above 40 nanogram per milliliter or 100 nanomole per liter reduces viral infections and related deaths significantly. This graph, published on the 26th of April this year, 2020, show a 10 times increase in risk to die from COVID-19 if your vitamin D status is below 20 nanograms per milliliter. The letter A in NEWSTART stands for air or atmosphere, or we can also say a breath of life. I want to read to you from Genesis 2 verse 7. It tells us, "And the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." It tells us all in one sentence, but to try and grasp or unpack the full meaning, thousands of research papers have been printed. In this talk, I will select a few and try my best to explain current knowledge in terms of what we know about air as the breath of life. Life came about as a result of a direct gift from God. But let us first go for a walk. Good day. We are busy with a brisk walk through a conservancy next to our property that we have the privilege to have access to. And at the same time, we are doing what I've learned to know as forest bathing. Early morning, when the trees awake, birds actually stimulate the leaves to open the stomata, and a rich flow of aerosols come from the trees early morning, probably throughout the day. And these camphor, you can smell the camphor, you can smell the eucalyptus, and that has got immune building properties for us as humans. So it's a blessing to walk in the forest. We will tell you more about that in the lecture, but also I want to tell you about the nose, a marvelous miracle, a master design. The nose produces nitric oxide if you breathe through the nose, not through the mouth, and that nitric oxide has various functions in the body, even enhancing your immune system. We'll tell you more about that a little later. Air is as essential to life as the sun and as water. We can breathe it, move in it, and see long distance in clear air. Air or atmosphere is actually a very thin layer and is visible from space as a thin band between Earth and space. They say if you take a basketball, it will be a thin plastic layer in comparison. Gravity holds the air to the surface. Within the atmosphere, there is a constant movement of air called weather. The atmosphere is mainly nitrogen, 78%, 20% oxygen, and 1% water vapor and other gases. Oxygen is the most important element in the human body, and only 4 elements, namely carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen, makes up 96.2% of the human body. However, about 25 elements are essential for life. Life starts and stops with a breath. We can survive without food for 3 weeks, without water for 3 days, but without air, not more than 3 minutes. According to Conscience Breathing website, we take up to 1,000 breaths per hour. In other words, 25,000 breaths in a single day. That is 10 to 20 kilogram of air passing in and out of our system each day, which is 10 times more than the amount of food we eat. This says a lot of how important our breathing is. Air quality is important. Most people who had intense early exposure to the 9/11 Trade Center bombings did sustain around a 10% reduction in lung function, and this reduction has now persisted for more than a decade. Persons most affected generally had pre-existing lung problems. Smokers were harder hit than non-smokers. Some firefighters' lungs aged the equivalent of 10 to 12 years in the first weeks to months following the attack from the dust they breathed. An interesting study on the effect of air pollution was published by the USA National Institute for Health. From 2013 to 2016, 4 coal-fired power plants in the Louisville, Kentucky region either converted to natural gas or installed scrubbers to reduce sulfur dioxide emissions. The researchers measured reductions in exposure to coal-fired power plant emissions over the study period and mapped them to changes in asthma symptoms among 207 people tracked by the Air Louisville project. The team also looked at changes in emergency department use and hospitalizations due to asthma within the county. The results from this study indicate that reductions in sulfur dioxide emissions from 4 coal-fired power plants in Kentucky were associated with fewer local hospitalizations and emergency department visits due to asthma. Also, an immediate drop in people's use of rescue inhalers in the area indicated a reduction in daily asthma symptoms. The message is clear: stay far away from sources of air pollution. It was when working with the infrared gas analyzer in the inserted picture that I became acutely aware of how interdependent plant and animal or human life really is. One example is in terms of air quality. Plants produce oxygen that humans and animals need and cannot do without, and humans breathe out carbon dioxide that plants need and cannot do without. What a marvelous synergism between plant and animal or man, and way to keep the ecosystem in balance. I measured photosynthesis and monitored carbon dioxide levels in the crop canopy. It was interesting to see that carbon dioxide could drop quite low in a dense sugarcane leaf canopy when air movement was restricted. On the other hand, carbon dioxide buildup and associated oxygen depletion could be demonstrated easily in a building where people are gathered and feed-in of fresh air is lacking. Another demonstration of how plants and humans need each other is in terms of nitrogen. Even though nitrogen is the most abundant gas in air, as we said 78%, humans is unable to process it via the lungs and bloodstream. Not that the nitrogen is not needed, the human body contains about 3% nitrogen by mass, the fourth most abundant element in the body after oxygen, carbon, and hydrogen. The master design determined that we will be dependent on plants such as soybeans to fix nitrogen into an organic form that can be utilized by man and animal. Nitrogen is the cornerstone of all proteins, without which life cannot function, but more about that in a future talk. We can moderate breathing patterns. Breathing is the bridge between the mind and the body, the connection between consciousness and unconsciousness. Breath is also under control of the autonomic nervous system, but we have been given the ability to moderate through our lifestyle and habits. Different emotions have different breathing patterns. Full, deep breathing is associated with mindfulness and lower levels of blood pressure, anxiety, and strength, while shallow, restricted breathing is associated with flight or fight responses, high blood pressure, anxiety, stress, and shortened lifespan. Breathing through the nose stimulates the prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning, decision-making, emotional control. Just the simple act of deep breathing can help us to think more clearly and understand our worries. Did you know that your health is also dependent on your breathing patterns? The breathing rate affects the heart or the pulse rate. You can test it out on yourself. The lymphatic system does not have a heart like your blood system, so it is dependent on the movement of your diaphragm or deep breathing to pump. We can be overweight because of poor or shallow breathing, and I'll tell you more about that now. Slow, deep breathing can help to relax, to fall asleep, to slow heartbeat, and to lower blood pressure. Lower respiration rate can help us live longer. The lymphatic system is dependent on the diaphragm and breathing to remove interstitial fluids from tissues, to absorb fats from digestive system, and to transport white blood cells. An interesting perspective on breathing and weight loss was published in the British Medical Journal in 2014. This article showed that the lungs are the primary organ for weight loss. Food basically consists of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So in order to get rid of 10 kilograms of body fat, we need to inhale 29 kilograms of oxygen and will then exhale 28 kilograms of carbon dioxide. On average, a man will transpire 1 kilogram of carbon per week, so it will take you about 8 weeks and food fasting to lose the demonstrated 10 kilograms. If you stop the show for a minute and study the biochemistry on this slide, you will notice that the major food groups, namely carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, all consist predominantly out of oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen in protein. So, if metabolized 100%, it can all, except for the nitrogen and sulfur in protein, all be turned into carbon dioxide and water. The same author illustrated In this slide, the breathing time needed to offset the carbon gain from an apple, which is 1 hour of breathing, and 14 hours to cancel the weight gained from eating a burger, a packet of French fries, and soda drink. Did you know that there is a relationship between breaths per minute and longevity? It is biologically impossible to have an anxiety or panic attack when you are breathing slowly, deeply, and evenly. There are billions spent every year on anxiety medicine to treat the symptoms instead of addressing the root cause, namely breathing habit. Each heartbeat is the result of the interplay between the two branches of the autonomic nervous system, namely the sympathetic, which is the flight or fight response, and the parasympathetic, which is the rest or digest response. A robust person will have a heartbeat of about 60 per minute, but each beat is the result of the arm wrestling between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is always ready to accelerate, looking for emergencies to keep you safe. The parasympathetic wants to calm you down, slow your pulse and respiratory rate, lower the blood pressure, use the energy to optimize the immune system, to detoxify and to digest your food. Modern life dictates a strong sympathetic overdrive response, which will stop your digestion, get more oxygen, increase the blood pressure and heart rate to pump blood to the muscles and cause a constant anxiety. Sympathetic overdrive have been associated with cardiac mortality, anxiety, depression, migraines, acid reflux, back pain, shallow breathing. Proper breathing is dynamic. It moves the diaphragm so that even the kidneys move 2 to 3 centimeter. Pull air into the lungs, get a 360-degree expansion of the torso, actuate the fluids, detoxify the body, and deliver more nutrition to the cells. This table lists various body organs and the effect that the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous pulses would have on that organ. I find the eye response very interesting. As you can see here, parasympathetic stimulates to increase bulging of the lens for close vision, and in the sympathetic, it decreases bulging, prepares for distant vision. In humans, the nose has 3 functions. It has resonating cavities for the voice. It has the olfactory organ to help us sense odors. It is the upper part of the respiratory tract which functions to filter air and trap pollen onto the sticky mucus lining of the nose, warm the incoming air to facilitate oxygen uptake in the lungs, and moisten the air before it reaches the lungs. The nose middle plate contains blood vessels in the mucous membrane which warm the air but also bring nutrients such as L-arginine amino acid, a precursor for nitric oxide, which plays an important role in sterilizing the air entering through the nose. Nitric oxide is produced in the nasal cavities, where it plays a very important role to sterilize incoming air. It can actually inhibit the replication of virus and bacteria. It dilates arteries, improves lung flow and uptake of oxygen in the bloodstream. It facilitates a surfactant which helps elasticity of lungs. It prevents plaque formation. A significant amount of nitric oxide is produced in the nasal cavities and a lower quantity in the blood vessel epithelial cells on the lungs. It's not produced in the mouth, so it's useful to keep the mouth closed, especially during this time, to get the maximum benefit from nitric oxide produced in the nose. The only way to harness the antiviral properties of breathing is through the nose. Nose breathing traps outgoing moisture and heat. Mouth breathing results in 42% more water loss. Breathe slowly and take air into deeper regions of the lungs where more blood circulates. Oxygen level test indicate by time you can hold your breath. It should be approximately 40 seconds. The upper limit of holding breath while walking should be in the vicinity of 80 paces. Professor Ron Lindberg from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden published this short paper indicating that nitrogen oxide can be moved out of the paranasal sinuses into the nasal cavity by humming, so to increase nitrogen oxide from about 200 for normal breathing to more than 3,000 parts per billion if humming is practiced. To facilitate the absorption of oxygen and the release of carbon dioxide, about 5 to 8 liters of air per minute are brought in and taken out of the lungs, and about 300 milliliter of oxygen is transferred from the alveoli to the blood each minute when at rest. At the same time, a similar volume of carbon dioxide moves from the blood to the alveoli and is exhaled. During exercise, it is possible to breathe in and out more than 100 liters of air per minute and extract 3 liters of oxygen from this air per minute. The rate at which oxygen is used by the body is one measure of the rate of energy expended by the body. Energy is not required to move oxygen or carbon dioxide across the membranes. Instead, these gases follow pressure gradients that allow them to diffuse. The gas exchange takes place in the millions of alveoli in the lungs and the capillaries that envelop them. I want to talk a little bit about forest bathing. Of course, if you go for a walk in the forest, you get more oxygen, especially early morning when the sun is out and the stomata on the leaves is open. You get plenty of oxygen release. And of course, there's a refreshing view in the woods. It's always nice to wander around in nature. And forest bathing will boost the immune system. A series of joint studies from Stanford University School of Medicine and several medical schools and institutions in Japan demonstrated that exposure to phytoncides released by trees and plants may boost immunity by increasing natural killer cell quantity and activity. These studies show that exposure to forests or forest bathing can also contribute to prevent viral infections such as COVID-19. These two graphs show that forest sunbathing significantly affected the proportion and the number of intracellular factors of immunity after 2.5 hours on the first day, and even another improvement on the second day when 2.5 hours was spent in the forest. In this graph, forest hiking was compared with city hiking, and as you can see, in the forest there was significant improvement, whereas in city hiking there was no significant effect on the immunity factors. In this study, they looked at the composition of the phytoncides coming from the trees and found that it was essential oils that increased the natural killer cells activity and the percentage of natural killer cells. COVID-19 can cause breathing problems. As the coronavirus causes inflammation and fluid that fill up the air sacs in the lungs, the patients experience acute respiratory distress syndrome and dangerously low oxygen levels in the blood. ARDS is caused by, amongst others, pneumonia, severe trauma, and tissue injury. Weakening of the immune system and increased inflammation, which damages organs and also promotes viral replication, is the most common explanation for the COVID-19 effect. One of the Seventh-day Adventist health principles is to get out in fresh air. While this may be one of the simplest principles, it is often forgotten or just simply not practiced with the same importance as others such as nutrition or exercise. Let me read to you words of wisdom that came to us more than 100 years ago and is recorded in Testimonies Volume 2. The stomach, liver, lungs, and brain are suffering for want of deep, full inspirations of air, which would electrify the blood and impart to it a bright, lively color, and which alone can keep it pure and give tone and vigor to every part of the living machinery. I want to end off with 2 verses from Job 27. As long as I have life within me, the breath of God in my nostrils, my lips will not say anything wicked, and my tongue will not utter lies. Beautiful words of wisdom that we can end off this talk. We trust you have learned from this talk and will go out and enjoy clean, fresh air with greater determination. Thank you.